after lunch session, which is always a little bit of a challenge, as we all know. And so I have some photos and pictures in there, which I'm going to talk to you know, keep you engaging with this in all modalities. I'd like, first of all, to really very much thank Sarah and Richard and the ReSIG group for including me in the program here, and also the two other Impulse people and the presenters. I'm finding it a really enjoyable, interesting, stimulating day. So I hope you like what's coming up and find it useful. So this is the title of my strand here: Identities, Roles, Relationships and Context in Research. What do I need to point this at?
This computer really
I've got, sorry, Sarah. Got to turn to it. Okay, this is, I do research in emotion, and Elena Brotheris is a Finnish photographer who several years ago did a photographic series called Sweet Française, and it was about her experience as a photographer going from Finland to live and work and study in France, and the slight sense of alienation that she felt not knowing any of the language. So I use that a little bit in my work in emotion and language learning. But here, this particular photograph, I think they're all sort of auto-portraits. I think to me represents something of the researcher, or a moment in the life of the researcher. So here you are, on the bed of your notes, the things you've read, you've been reading, thinking, and now you're ready to go out, perhaps to gather data, and you have your bag, which can also be kind of all your metaphorical, it can be abstract, what you're going to use and take with you, and with that, that slight moment before you go into the research context. So the feeling of what happens in research and what we do really very much links with what we choose to engage with, the research questions we ask, and so on. I'm not going to talk about emotion very much in this, but I think the emotional life of the researcher and developing resilience and the ability to regulate your emotions is important. Our day is called How Do We Be, Become and Grow as Researchers, and I think we probably go through these three stages, but many more. I think when we begin, we conceptualize research probably much more as a cognitive process. So how do we do research? How do I do research? And we read books and attend courses and so on and so on. But I think that understanding of research as a cognitive dimension has been amplified to a degree that it needs to be counterbalanced by the actual experience of doing research, the ongoing learning that you do. And part of the ongoing learning, I think, you also then need to learn how to participate as a researcher, how to participate in particular communities and particular relationships, and also to contribute. So who's our research for? Is it for ourselves? Is it for our career? Is it for our students? Is it for learners? Is it for other teachers? Is it for the profession? Is it to address burning issues of the age? Is it to deal with national policy, and so on and so on? But I think that has been touched on today, but also I think something that always goes on is how to develop through ongoing learning about yourself and others. So you can learn about yourself as a researcher, the kind of research that fits with you, with your experience, with your preferences, with your skills. But then I think you also begin to develop how you learn about yourself in the research process, how you represent yourself as a researcher, so there's a need for a lot of reflexivity now, and how yourself as a researcher influences, goes to Sian's point, a little bit of how the story that you bring out. And there's an increasing need in our field for that, but also how you develop through ongoing learning about others. And again, that can be about research participants, or it can also be about fellow researchers. Okay, so I'm going to talk first of all about identities and roles. And the word identity, I think David Block has mentioned this, does a lot of work in our field. It's been probably quite salient in the field for about 15 years. And I think the reason the issue of identity is so strong when you think about researchers is that the term role mostly focuses on things like knowledge, skill, actions you take, things like that. And it's too narrow a lens to fully understand the life of the researcher. So for example, in our group this morning, we were talking about the degree of agency you have in the kinds of research questions you research. And people were saying that there are quite often commercial drivers behind this. So, you know, we want our university to research these kinds of questions so they can go for research funding. In a sense, if it was just about role, if our lives as researchers were just about roles, we probably do all have the knowledge and skills to some degree to fit into those particular drivers, or we could develop them. But actually, because research engages our identities, we have questions of, well, that really does or doesn't feel like me. I'm not sure I could do that well. I'm not sure I'd feel comfortable doing that. I don't think I'm the best fit. So identities are really about the things we bring to research, are our biographies, our subjectivities, our sense of agency or lack of that, and such matters which are really very important. So here I've taken, this is a photo I took summer in New Zealand. A few weekends ago. It's a lighthouse quite on the coast near my university. And you can, to some degree, think of role, I think, as an automated lighthouse. So it can kind of, you know, start up the light, and it can take measurements, and it can do this and send weather reports and things like that. But identities, it's much more like when a lighthouse keeper lived there and looked after that light and was responsible for fixing the light and sending messages about ships, sending out observations and so on. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of inhabiting the role. So I think identity is actually quite critical. If we think about relationships and context, this is a photo by, it's a sketch, a 1911 sketch by Malevich. Where's our, how do you say it? Malevich. Okay, 1911 of the Russian bathhouse. And I like this photo, this sketch, because I think in some ways, in research, as you enter a context, it's all a new research context or new research relationships. It's in a sense like perhaps going to a bathhouse for the first time. You think, what's it going to be like? Am I going to feel comfortable? You know, will everybody be staring at me? You know, is it going to work? And also you partly have to do that to work well in research to kind of make the familiar strange. So I quite like this picture here. I think relationships, questions of relationships and contexts as key parts of research have become so important because of the shifts in our field. So compared to 20 years ago, there's been a shift from, we've developed interests in individuals rather than groups or large populations. We've developed an interest or a trust in the emic view of participants. So what do they see as significant? What's important for them? We've developed a view of variability, whereas as interested in variability as we are in kind of things that we can generalise or things that appear constant or the same. They're just some of the ways in which the field has shifted. And I think that to get into all those areas, you have to develop relationships and work in context. So the salience of this is partly the shifts within our field. I think relationships and contexts are critical because, in my view, they go against the view that research is a bounded process, that you can go in and you can implement it, and that it's kind of fairly inert or fairly static. So relationships and contexts, as Sue was saying, are unpredictable and messy, and that now is the area that we wish to capture with our research. But I think relationships and context are very important too, and I'd urge you to embed yourself in this aspect of research to get very close, because I think that's where you do most of your learning as a researcher. I think in relationships with people where things go off in directions that you didn't expect, where you learn, where as your understanding of context grows, you need to solve particular problems in your research that just appear there, emergent. And so I would argue that for David and Sue and myself and everyone else in the room, Sarah, this aspect of research will always test us. It will always require us to keep thinking. So it's kind of the most exciting. So we're always actually, I like to think, re-entering the bathhouse. Okay. Basically, for our strand, let's look at. I've just got the titles here of the sessions, and if you look at, we've looked at many of these. Well, we've seen some of these areas. But in the first one, there's kind of a critical perspective on developing as a researcher and kind of the kinds of dilemmas or choices which are not entirely comfortable. I think I would argue that not only we've talked about complexity in terms of identity and role as a researcher, we've talked about multiple things, but I'd also think that aspects of our identities as researchers are very often conflictual. And that is completely the nature of the beast. So, you know, that's good, but it conflicts with that. You know, am I a teacher? Am I a researcher? Is one taking away from the other? And those, I think you were saying, we can't fix it, or let it be, or something like that. That's kind of on the horns of those dilemmas. They aren't necessarily immediately solvable, but they are understandable. The second one, again, this is about wearing two hats, two identities. The third one is really about getting, as I interpret it, the question of how you enact your own agency in terms of getting support for your actual research. And then the next one's about trajectory. So we've talked quite a bit about journey. I think it's also interesting to think about trajectory. And the way I like to think about that is that we have multiple trajectories as researchers. And they're not all moving forward at the same rate, at the same time. So you might have a particular trajectory, and then that goes kind of quiet for a while, and you're driving forward on something else. And then this one takes up again and moves forward and comes into this one. I don't know if I'm kind of making sense. So we're all keeping multiple trajectories going, which crisscross and sometimes conflict. Okay, that's how I like to think of it. Again, more about journey and trajectory. More about the challenges of being a researcher, but with a particular focus on identity again. And the way our identity is shaped by tensions, constraints, and opportunities, and that's an ongoing dialectic. And finally, why is it so complex to balance these elements? And I think also in this strand, people are talking about the difference between researching teachers and researching learners, and being a teacher, researcher, and so on. So I want to kind of end with a bigger point, which I think it's not that there's kind of research and that influences our identities and our roles and our contexts and our relationships, but actually I want to argue that our identities and roles and contexts and relationships in fact deeply influence research in our field and the direction of research and the nature of research. So I want to, in my view, the way we constitute and enact our multiple identities as researchers influences on the questions that have been asked. So what do we see as a research problem? What questions have been asked? Very interestingly too, which questions have been ignored or overlooked. What's seen as worth researching and what's seen as isn't. And that all comes from our researcher, our identities and experiences and contexts. it also influences how do we try and find answers. So somebody was mentioning before that they were researching in a particular area and their supervisor wanted them to use a particular tool set, a particular test. And they felt that that was very much leading their research off into another direction, but also kind of it didn't fit their identity. That was kind of my interpretation of it. So, in other words, I'm not sure I could try to find answers using that way. Even if I agreed with that question, I'm not, and that engages questions of identity. Our identity is also very linked in with how do we present what we found. So this goes to Sian's point about the bits we choose to put out there, goes into data selection, the way we write around the data, the theories we use, the conclusions we draw, the implications we raise, and critically the last one, who we see as the audiences for our research. Is it colleagues, is it teachers, is it the learners, is it the field as we view it? So that's kind of my impulse on this strand. Thank you for listening. And just to say too, I have to fly out, so I'll be leaving at 5:15. So I'm very sorry probably to be the first one to leave. But when you see me go, that's the reason. So thank you.